Okay, so thank you for inviting me today. I am going to speak to you as an architect, and as I get started, I want to ask you if you really realize what a privilege it is to be where you are today. If you're interested in a career in real estate, choosing to attend this colloquium is quite a gift. And you'll tell me, hey, no, John, we're paying for this, but that's fine. Even though you're paying for your education, the ability to take part in this series of lectures, this series of panels, is something that I wish I had had when I was your age. I wish they had done something like this in my architecture school, because it provides a real overview of really what shapes our built environment. And as architects, we're primarily concerned, we spend all of our time in physical space and shaping the places and the buildings that we move in and out and through. How many of you came to Boston College, accepted the offer to attend, and committed to Boston College without ever setting foot on this campus? Okay, so I would say that's about 4 or 5% of the audience, maybe 8% of the audience. The other 92 of you, for whatever reason, came here. And I suspect that it is because the physical place is important to you. You did not want to spend the next 4 years in a place you had never been. You wanted to see it, you wanted to feel it, you wanted to touch it, you wanted to be where it was before you made your decision. And today, I want to talk to you about the architect's role in making places, making buildings, and being a part of this real estate ecosystem. You have the privilege of listening to, aside from me, but a privilege of listening to some of the most influential people in Boston real estate today, developers and owners. They're the kind of the center of real estate. They're the ones that make things happen. They bring a lot of creativity to what they do. Builders, contractors, attorneys, advisors, because real estate happens in physical places, in towns and cities, and the municipalities have a lot of say over what gets built in their communities. And so the developer, the owner, the institution, the university has to interface with the communities in which we live, work, and do our thing. And so that liaison, the attorneys, the advisors, the people who help get projects entitled are very important in this ecosystem. And if we're building, whether it's an apartment building, an office building, a lab building, there's probably someone who has to make a deal for a tenant, make a deal for a resident, a broker, a marketer. It's a very important part of the ecosystem, and you get to hear from all of those people as a result of coming to this colloquium this semester. It's a tremendous privilege. Today, I'm going to represent not only myself as an architect, but all of the architects. I think I'm the only one on the thing that is speaking to you about the role of the architect. So I'm going to speak for all of us. Our world is very complex. If you think about all the things that went into the design of this room, it's not only the shape of the space, the quality of the light coming through the windows, the acoustics of the room need to be figured out. Most architects don't know that, but we have acoustical consultants. The lighting in the room needs to be figured out. Most architects know a little bit about that, but not enough to really specify the light fixtures that go in the ceiling, and so on and so forth. So our days are spent in the middle of this myriad of other consultants that advise us and prepare drawings and help us do our work so that when we finish a building or we finish a place, it's complete and it functions at every level. It functions visually, acoustically. The seat you're sitting in has to have certain ergonomic dimensions about it to see the sight lines. All of that has to be figured out, and all of that is the role of the architect or the designer. I want to give you the entire history of architecture in 2 minutes, so we're going to be grossly oversimplified here. But I want you to pay careful attention because there is a pop quiz coming after the next two slides. For centuries, architecture involved wood, stone, brick, glass, primitive metals. And as late as 1800s, you go back and you look at famous buildings in Boston that were built in the 1800s. The vast majority of them are load-bearing masonry buildings. The brick walls held up the buildings. The floors are made of wood. But then, about the turn of the 20th century, about 1900, when Henry Ford was working on the Model T automobile, when the Wright brothers were figuring out how to lift a human into flight, an incredible thing happened in building technologies, and it totally transformed the next century. Three things were roughly invented at the turn of the 20th century. The steel frame, which allowed buildings to go higher and be constructed out of steel. The elevator, which allowed the people to go up in those buildings. And later on in the early 20th century, the air conditioner, which totally transformed our comfort levels inside of buildings. These three men were three architectural pioneers of that generation, of that 100 years. You might recognize some of the buildings up here, but whether it's at the scale of a residence, buildings before 1900, residence homes did not look like those three pictures in the middle of the screen there. The steel frame and those other inventions I talked about totally transformed not only the way we live in single-family homes, but in much larger scale buildings. Buildings of the scale on the column on the right generally weren't built before 1900. It was revolutionary, and architects spent the whole 100 years between 1900 and 2000 adapting to changes in building technologies. 21st century, it's different. In the 21st century, the revolution is in cyberspace, it's digital, it's a non-physical realm, and it's provided a total disruption to our society. It's disrupted the way we communicate, it's disrupted the way that we relate to one another. We refer to a social network now, right? Our relationships are increasingly happening online. And so much of what we do is transactional. I'll tell you that as a child, I blew my father's mind when I had an ATM card. He couldn't imagine going to the bank and not talking to a teller. And I'm like, Dad, it's easy. You walk, you stick your card in, and they give you money. It comes out. And he could never adapt to that. He never used an ATM card. I'm still using my ATM card. You guys think I'm old school because you don't even need to do that anymore. But any transaction is starting to happen digitally now. You can press a button and a roll of paper towels will show up at your door. It's a transaction. It's not a relationship anymore. When I first moved to Boston, in my neighborhood, there was a milkman who still came around and delivered milk every day. And several people had a relationship with that milkman. They knew him by name. They looked forward to him dropping off the milk every Wednesday morning. That's not there anymore. But my generation, we went to the grocery store and we would grab a gallon of milk. Your generation, you press a button and the milk shows up in your residence hall. So much of our society has become purely transactional. But real estate, and specifically my career, and I think your career, will be far more defined by the relationships you build than by the transactions you make. And real estate can be a very transactional business, but a successful and rewarding career in real estate, I think, is far more a function of relationships. So don't confuse media for relationships. Social media is a way of having a relationship, a transaction even, but it is a poor substitute for a true relationship in physical space, which comes back to real estate. Here's the pop quiz. on those last two slides, what did we miss? We talked about transformational architecture over 100 years and then into the 21st century. What was missing? What did I not talk about? I'll give you a review. Those guys, those guys. What's missing? Go ahead.
What happened in between?
Well, what happened in between, yeah, that's not what I'm looking for, but good try. Somebody else?
Urban renewal.
Urban renewal, there's a little clue there. We built bigger buildings, which means we had to clear out the smaller buildings in our downtowns. So yeah, that's getting warm. What else is missing? Huh? Politicians? Sort of, yeah. How about who are those three guys on the left? How would you describe them? And those three guys, how would you describe them? If you didn't know who they were.
One slide's a lot older than the second slide.
They're older, but in their prime, they were the same age. Go ahead. I'm not gonna quit till you.
These are the builders, and you had mentioned those.
Yeah, these are the architects. Go ahead.
They're all white.
They're all white, and they're all
Guys.
male. Yes. We missed so much. We did not realize how inequitable the things we were doing were. It was so exclusionary, and we didn't even realize it. We were so focused on the technologies that were advancing our society and enabling us to do more that we didn't realize that we had left out very important parts of our society. Jane Jacobs in 1961, as they tore apart her neighborhood that was considered a slum in New York to replace it with newer, brighter, bigger buildings, she said, guys, you're destroying the fabric of our society. This network of people that live together and transact and do business, they have relationships, and as you clear them out and you bring in new and you displace people, you're hurting society, you're not helping. And when she wrote that book, it was very controversial. Now we realize she was right. Richard Rothstein, in 2017, he's writing about what happened in mid-century America, in our cities, in our towns. Racial segregation. It was systemic. It was through banking. It was through zoning. It was through real estate that we separated black people from white people, that we separated Asian people from white people. And the book is fascinating, but talk about stacking the deck. It made it virtually impossible for a person of color to succeed in our society. And we as architects and real estate developers and financiers and municipal policy shapers, we all had a hand in that, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so, in the 21st century, we find ourselves trying to right these two wrongs. And the second thing that we missed is none of those, well, most of those buildings that you saw were built with a concern about efficiency and form and sculptural shape and how they looked. None of them, virtually none of them, were built with a concern about how much energy they used, how much pollutants they put into the air, how much carbon they put in the air. We didn't even start measuring that really till the 21st century. And you guys, through your classes, maybe through just popular knowledge, you know that buildings are responsible for about 40% of all of the fossil fuel carbon that goes into our atmosphere and causes global warming. And so as architects, we've taken on a challenge by 2030 to make all of our work carbon neutral, to reduce the operational carbon in a building that's made by heating that building and cooling that building to make it neutral, to make it essentially zero. We accomplish that largely through electrifying our buildings and getting rid of fossil fuels. Architects as a practice are very focused on eliminating the operational carbon that buildings make. Also, some of you may be familiar with this concept of embodied carbon. If you can get the operations of a building down to zero carbon, can we also get the manufacture and construction of the building? All the components, the manufacture of your chair that you're sitting in, these lights, those, when they're made and they're transported, they all put carbon into the atmosphere. Can we actually use lower carbon products in our buildings and reduce what we call the embodied carbon in the building? So fighting the social aspects of what we build and the climate aspects of what we build is what the Boston Society of Architects, and really architects all across America, and I would say even all across the world, are really, really focused on in the 21st century. So you might have heard this concept of holistic sustainability, where a building or a place that is truly sustainable achieves three things. It achieves social justice, it's people, planet, profit. It achieves social justice, it achieves environmental stewardship, and it achieves economic benefit for its users and its owners. So much of commercial real estate is focused on the economic benefit that the users and the owners derive. That's why financing and doing these deals and building your pro formas are so critically important, because the deal has to work. It has to be profitable. It has to produce something of a return, or no one will build it. But that alone can't be the criteria by which we determine what is a viable project or not. We have to make sure that the work that we do brings about equity and social justice. We have to make sure that the work that we do does the least amount of harm to our environment, and in fact can be even regenerative to our environment and regenerative to our planet. And so as a society of architects in Boston, we're really focused on making sure that we don't make the mistakes of the 20th century and get fascinated by new technologies and building form. We want to really focus on the content and the effects of what we do and how they affect our environment. I want to conclude my little speech to you guys by giving you an example of what I'm talking about. This is a project that we recently completed that I'm very excited about. It's a small school in Portland, Maine. It's the University of Southern Maine. It's one of their satellite campuses. The university's in Gorham, Maine, but they have a satellite campus in downtown Portland. And in 2021, it looked like this: a few buildings. It was a commuter school, 7,500 students. Everybody came, parked in the parking deck, and went to their classes and then went home. It's a school that prides itself in not the number of students it turns away, i.e. its low acceptance rate. It prides itself in the number of students it accepts, because this is a gateway college. This is helping first-generation students from low-income families get good jobs. And that is their mission, and they really wanted to do that better and create a more equitable opportunity for these first-generation and these low-income students to have access to the job market and get a good education. So they decided that they would build an on-campus residence hall and a new student center to really attract more students, to make them feel at home, and to do it all very sustainably. And that was our mission. In 2021, it looked like the photo on the left. In 2024, it looks like the photo on the right. And this is a real estate deal. It's done for a university, but it was a real estate deal. They hired a private developer to come in and hire the architect, hire the builder, and deliver this project turnkey for the university. So this is how the ecosystem mapped out for this particular project. USM Portland was the ultimate client. Capstone Development Partners was the developer. And they hired PC Construction as the design builder, an architectural and engineering firm in Portland called SMRT as the architect of record, and they came down south a little bit to Boston to find us as the design architects. We brought with us our array of various consultants that always advise us, and together we did this project over 3 years. Everybody had a role in the success of that project. In terms of the numbers, there are other people who will come and talk to you far more in depth about how deals are put together, but just suffice it to say that this project was funded by a $20 million bond referendum that the university was able to issue, university bonds, by about $10 million of philanthropy that they raised. They had a capital campaign and they raised dollars from their alumni and from other contributors. And the rest, the other $70 million, came from private equity financing. I don't know where they got the loans, but they got the loans and they're paying back the debt service. And so the Portland Commons Residence Hall we deal in construction costs primarily. That's the budgets we have to hit. But as you guys know, the legal and the engineering costs and various other soft costs all add to a project. So together, the total project cost for the residence hall was about $72 million. The project cost for the McGoldrick Center was $26 million, a total of about a $100 million project. It looks like this today: 580 student beds in an 8-story wing and a 5-story wing, a 1-acre green lawn out front, and then a student center of about 40,000 square feet. And the residence hall is designed to passive house standards. Some of you may have heard that terminology before. It basically means that the building envelope, the walls of the building, are so highly insulated that no heat gets in or out. It's like your Yeti thermos that you carry around to class or whatever. It stays warm. It basically stays 70 degrees in there throughout the year, no matter how hot or cold it is outside. So it takes very little energy to heat or cool it. And so these things on top that look like R2-D2 up there are all energy recovery ventilation units. We take the heat that is in the exhaust from the toilets, from the showers, all the heat that we have to throw out of the building, and these machines suck the heat out of that exhaust stream and then pump it back into the building. And so again, the heating energy is not lost going through the flues. And so the residence hall there is very highly energy efficient. It runs at about 25% less energy than the already restrictive building code requires in the city of Portland. The McGoldrick Center, the campus center there, is constructed to lower not only the operational carbon but the embodied carbon. Over a third of it is constructed out of wood. You see the wood diagonal struts that hold up the porch. That's called mass timber construction. A lot of new buildings being built these days, ironically, we're going back to wood because it embodies a lot of carbon. A tree sucks carbon out of the air and it stores it in the body of the tree. So when we use wood, it really lowers the embodied carbon. Wood is a lot less expensive to produce, manufacture than steel, which requires really high temperatures and consumes a lot of energy. You notice also the big front porch that faces south. In the summer, the sun is high, and we don't want it hitting that glass because it will make the inside too hot. So we shield it with that front porch, that big cantilever there that holds up over the glass. It keeps the sun off of the glass in the summer. In the winter, when it's colder, we want the sun to come in, but fortunately the sun is lower in the south, and so it slides under there and it warms the space inside. So those are ways that architects take advantage of the sun's natural ability to heat spaces. And then finally back to the residence hall. Aside from very low heat transmission inside to outside. All of the mechanical systems in there are electric, meaning that they're all generated with clean energy and there are no fossil fuels being put into the air to heat or cool the building. And then finally, back on the McGoldrick Center, there is a small 1.2 kilovolt array of solar panels which provide about 20% of the energy used by the Student Center. So we feel like we really did achieve a lot of environmental objectives with this design. What about the social aspect? If you're a commuting student from a first-generation family, a low-income family, to be able to come and have a place like this to hang out and meet friends is a real asset. And this has become a home for the other 6,500 students who commute to this campus every day. It's a really social space. It has a 3-meal-a-day dining facility that serves healthy, nutritional, locally sourced food. It has a brew pub, which, if you've studied innovation economies, one of the key elements of any innovation economy is a brew pub. There is a 1-to-1 correlation with that. A double-sided fireplace that goes into the brew pub and out to the lounge. In the mornings, this serves, breakfast, and at lunch you can grab a sandwich here, but after 4 p.m. it turns into a brew pub. In the residence hall, there are all kinds of spaces where students can meet together to study, to cook, to play games, to have fun. It's that weaving of that social fabric that can only happen in a real space that makes the kind of relationships that form companies and then form lifelong relationships. And then individually, every student has a private bedroom. The apartments are all apartment style, like off-campus housing, and they all have common areas. So we've pulled 580 students out of the neighborhoods around the university and freed up 580 places for workforce housing in the city of Portland, which very much needed that. So that's a brief introduction of what architects do and what we did with one particular project. And you can QR code that and connect with me electronically, connect with our firm, but it's really cool to be able to see you in real space as well. 5 of you have these little test fabrics that I gave you. And as we turn to Q&A, I want to ask you, I want to get to ask the first question. What do they have in common? They're all made of individual strands of thread that are woven together to form a pattern. And that's the design aspect of it. Each one of those is a different design from a different manufacturer using a common element of colored yarns or threads. And I purposely wanted to give them out to you and let you hold them and touch them because this is not a network, this is a fabric. It's a real estate. It's a piece of real physical matter. And when you put all these threads together and you design it carefully, it becomes a beautiful fabric. That's what my vision as an architect is. Whether it's a building or it's a place or a community, is to weave all of us together in a socially just, environmentally responsible, and economically profitable way to make a beautiful fabric. And so I see those as symbiotic to what we as architects try to do. And then we can extend it a little bit further and say that designer did not make that. Somebody had to make the yarn, somebody had to take it to a loom. There are all kinds of people who had their hands in the making of that, just like all kinds of people who have their hands in this real estate ecosystem. But the end result is a tightly knit, beautiful, useful thing.
A little bit different from what you were talking about. You're the principal at Elkus Manfredi, and I'm wondering how you approach leadership when it comes to leading and listening, how you sort of manage a team.
That's a great question. I think anybody who is, that's a scary question for me, because anybody who's in a leadership position, you're always questioning, how effective am I being? I think that's true for Bill O'Brien as a football coach. It's true for our mayor, and it's true for me as a business person, that we often don't know whether the things that we try to do will have the results that we want them to have. But I think my own personal approach is very collaborative. I'm trying my best at every turn to take the very talented people that I work with, the architects, the consultants, the clients, and pull them all together and make sure that every voice is heard. Architecture has not always been that way, but today I've seen that the more successful projects are done when we really try to draw everybody in and let everybody make their contribution to it. So I would say that my leadership style is very inclusive of the team.
Thank you. Pivoting a little bit.
Yeah.
As far as managing your time, you're involved with like a million different things, and I'm wondering how you sort of, what is your week? How do you break it down and think about that?
Yeah. You guys have heard the old story about put the big rocks in first? Yes? No? Anyone?
No?
It's a quick story. Professor in a room like this, he has a jar, he puts some big rocks in, he asks the class, is this full? They say, of course not. So then he puts small rocks in around the edges, and is this full? Of course not. So he pours some sand in. Is this full? Of course not. And then he finally puts water in, and he says, now is the jar full? And everybody says, yes, now the jar is full. All of the air has been displaced. He says, what's the lesson? And they fumble around for a while, but finally he says, the lesson is you got to put the big rocks in first. And that's true. Whatever's most important to you, that is what you need to prioritize in terms of your schedule. And for some people, work is the most important thing. And that certainly, there's no employer out there who will tell you you're working too much. Or at least I don't think there are a lot of them. For me, my priorities have been my family, my commitment to my religious community, and my commitment to my profession. And it's kind of in that order. And so there's always sacrifices you have to make, but we've all got 168 hours, and I've found that if the big rocks take priority, the most important things take priority, then filling in around the edges with the other things, it just really enriches your life.
Cool, thank you. I've never heard that. Okay, do you have a favorite architectural style? And are you able to use it?
That is a great question, because there are so many styles. I mean, we would do a very different building here on Boston College's campus than we did at the University of Southern Maine's campus because of the context. There's such a strong and beautiful context here at Boston College that it demands that anyone working here acknowledge that and work with that. And so in terms of my own favorite style, I think the buildings I enjoy the most are buildings that are expressive of how they're built, that express their tectonics. If I can express the structural frame, the way at University of Southern Maine, the diagonals that hold up the big portico are a structural expression of supporting that roof and the big curtain wall there. That's the kind of architecture that excites me the most, that's real honest about how it was made.
Well, what do you mean by tectonics?
Tectonics is the way that materials are joined to make structure. you know, that handrail along the edge is not just floating in space, it is held up by something. It's held up by a bracket that's adhered to the wall. And you guys may care nothing about that, but believe me, every architect who walks in this room is looking to see how they detailed that and how that little metal piece meets that wood piece and how the metal bracket is adhered to the wall. Is it screwed in from the face? Is it screwed in from behind? That's tectonics, the assembling of materials.
Cool. So how have you seen architecture change since you've maybe come out of school?
Well, you got to remember, I came out of school before those three guys that were on the second slide ever had their impact on our society. In the time that I've practiced architecture, we've gone from drawing by hand on sheets of paper to entirely building three-dimensional models in all digitally. In fact, we are required to use very little paper these days. So the practice has transformed tremendously in the ways that we can model things, in the ways that we can shape things, and the volume of work that we can do. It's just been a tremendous, and when I use the word disruptive, I always use it in a positive context. It's a new way of doing things for the better. So the whole profession has been really disrupted. But for me personally, when I went to school, all of our projects were solo author, and I was competing against the students in my studio. Today in architecture, we assign groups of students to do projects together because we're focusing on the collaborative nature of architectural investigation. And instead of competing against one another, we're challenging the students to figure out ways to work together. And I've seen that in practice as well, that we're far more collaborative. There is no solitary genius who designs a building. It's always a team of people who have to work well together.
So when you look at Boston and its development, what do you see as sort of the biggest opportunities? What would you like to change over the next 20
Well, that's a great question for your audience. I have my idea, but anybody else want to answer that question before I do? What's Boston's biggest challenge over the next 20 years, architecturally, spatially?
Flood protection? Like protecting against floods?
Yes, we call that resiliency. There's a hurricane that's going to hit Florida less than 2 weeks after the last hurricane hit Florida. Maybe those things are just random, that this year's more active than others, or maybe our Earth is more angry these days, that the climate is changing, the globe is warming, and sea levels are rising. And if the scientists are correct, by 2050, the sea level could be as high as 2 or 3 feet higher in Boston. And if you've ever seen a map of that, about half of downtown Boston would be, for a certain percentage of the time, underwater if that were to happen. So that's a huge and immediate challenge for the city of Boston, is how do we deal with coastal resiliency? I think personally I would answer that question. My biggest challenge, that aside from that resiliency challenge of raising the whole city by 3 feet, I think the biggest challenge is the revitalization of our downtown core. If you look at the neighborhoods in downtown Boston, the Seaport, which is a new neighborhood, is pretty vibrant, very vibrant. Even the Back Bay, which is a mixed-use work and live environment, is pretty vital. The financial district, which was designed primarily as a single-use district for work, office-type work, is the area of town that's struggling the most right now. And I think over the next 20 years, you'll see a significant reinvestment and reinvention of the financial district in downtown Boston. And I hope to be around to be a part of that.
So when you talk about something like that, it's already everything's close and tall.
Right.
Like, how do you rebuild something so established?
Well, you have to be willing to tear something down that's outlived its useful life. And that goes to that whole concept of sustainability. The most sustainable building is the one that you don't build. The most sustainable building is a building that you can adapt to a new use without having to tear it all the way down. And so maybe that's the answer. Maybe repurposing a lot of the buildings that were designed for that single use of office work to find a new use for them and to preserve them and adapt them is clearly the best path. But I think that the metrics of those buildings, a lot of them, they were so designed for that single use that that's all they can ever be used for. And they may have to come down or be altered, significantly altered, to find a new use or a different use. And you mentioned that everything is close. Innovation and relationships thrive on proximity. I think, Boston is arguably not dense enough. I think we need to build far more housing, vertical housing, in the core of downtown Boston if we want to bring it back to life. We've got to put people there 24/7. And that's where architects can help. You can look at a little sliver of land that is, kind of left over, or maybe it's a few parking spaces, or maybe it's a 1 or 2 story building that could be rethought in a different way, and it could be a 20-story hotel. We can increase the density of Boston quite a bit and still have plenty of fresh air, plenty of open space, plenty of room to move around, and a more vital public realm.
All right. And so you were trained as both an engineer and an architect?
Yes.
Which is probably quite an asset for you.
Yes.
Do you divide those in your head? Do you feel like sometimes you're thinking as an engineer, sometimes as an architect?
I think most of the time I think of both. It's a blend for me. To stereotype it, an engineer solves the problem, and the solution is driven by metrics of the forces exerted on it. The engineer, not, again, a gross stereotype, but typically the engineer is driven more by non-aesthetic concerns. And again, gross stereotype, but the architects are driven primarily by aesthetics. They're sculptors. They want that building to look beautiful. And often that leads architects to propose things that just, they're not, if they're possible at all structurally, they cost a boatload of money. And left alone, the engineers, they'll come up with the most efficient solution, but it may be something you don't want to look at. And so pulling both of those together and creating something that is very efficient, very effective, cost effective, and beautiful, to me, that's the Holy Grail.
So one project I heard you wrote about was you want to replace the bridge connecting Harvard to the Charles River over Soldiers Field Road. You talked a little bit about the process of just how the whole ecosystem has to come together to make something happen.
Right.
I'm wondering if even just something that seems as simple as that, what might go into getting that one little bridge replaced?
Oh my gosh, first, I don't know where in the world you found that, but I have said that. You're right, that is a true story. I have a personal vendetta against this little pedestrian bridge that crosses Soldiers Field Road right at the Harvard Business School and right beside of the Charles River. Maybe you know the bridge I'm talking about, but you have the Harvard Business School, which next to the Boston College Business School is the highest ranked business school in the world, the wealthiest business school in the world, and across the river, the wealthiest university in the world, and this beautiful Weeks footbridge, which is a 3-arch span over the Charles River, that's just on every postcard of Harvard. And then right over the highway is this little kind of mistake that is not fun to walk across. It's as ugly as all get out. And I have no idea who designed it, but I think it was somebody who was only concerned about what's the least we can do and not get people killed by trying to cross Soldiers Field Road. And so every time I drive under it, I just get sick to my stomach. And so I actually, as my thesis at graduate school, I proposed replacing that bridge. And it's a beautiful, beautiful design, if I say so myself. But your question is, why hasn't it changed? It is so ugly. Why hasn't somebody taken it out? And the answer is because there is not the political will to do it. I'm the only person who's signed the petition to remove this bridge. Not enough people are offended by it. And so the Mass Department of Transportation, Soldiers Field Road is a state road, so you got to start at a state level. Harvard can't go out there and demolish the bridge themselves. They don't own the land. So we would have to get the State Department of Transportation to agree to it. I think it's technically in Alston, it's not in Cambridge, but we would have to get the city of Boston to agree to it. We would have to have somebody pay for it. That's maybe where Harvard could come in. It's not going to come from taxpayer dollars because the bridge that we have is functional. So we would have to have a contribution from Harvard. It's right against the edge of the water, so that's the State Environmental Protection Agency, because if anytime you're within 90 feet of or 150 feet of a public waterway, then you have to comply with all the environmental regulations that talk about the waterway. And then you would have to get the contractor and the designer, and it takes everybody that was on there, the lawyers, the financiers. I don't think we would need anybody to market it, so maybe not a broker, but everybody else would have to come in here.
Well, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. That's all I have. If anybody has more.
Hey, I appreciate you coming out here. My name is Patrick. So I was just wondering, kind of in architecture, how important is it building relationships with developers for the success of your business?
They write the checks that pay our people. That's a cliche. I'm glad you asked that question, because I want to start this conversation and conclude it about the importance of relationships. For us, the success of our firm has not been built on transactions. We are very happy to have a new client when we get new clients. When someone puts out an RFP and we respond to it and we win a commission, we're very excited to build new relationships. But the vast majority of our work comes from repeat clients, from people who've worked with us and value what we brought to the table and have called us back. Sometimes they've moved on from company A to company B, and they're like, oh, I really enjoyed working with Elkus Manfredi. Let's call them to do this new project that I have, maybe for a different company. And if you look back at all of the work we've done over our 30-something years in business, I've not done the math, but I would say 3/4 of it is probably more relationship-based than transactional-based. So our developer clients, our institutional clients, our clients from the corporate world who continually collaborate with us over multiple projects, those relationships are gold. And I'm far less concerned about what I'm designing than I am about who I'm designing it with in terms of my own fulfillment in a project. I would much rather do a low-profile, low-budget building with a client that I value and have a great relationship with than to design a beautiful skyscraper for a jerk. So.
Hi. thank you for coming here to speak with us. One of kind of like the questions I have is, what is kind of like the biggest challenge you face as an architect? Because where I live, most architects would kind of like design the building. It would be very beautiful. However, as kind of like the construction workers and these firms come in, they would have problem building it because it's too complex, or sometimes kind of like budgets would run out, and then in the end there would be kind of like this project incomplete, and it would just be there for like 5-10 years. So how would you kind of like address this
Ooh,
if it ever happens?
I got chills up my spine as you said that, because that is the anatomy of a painful project, is when we get out ahead of a budget and we design something that's too complicated, too fanciful, and then we turn it over to the builder and we don't have any involvement and they change it, or they fail to finish it, or the client, that leads to lawsuits, and that is very painful. So the opposite of that is when we partner with our clients, truly understand the budget, design to the budget, and stay involved in the whole process, right down to making sure that those brackets are put in the right place on the wall. That's when it's really successful and really fulfilling. So I'd say the answer to the hardest part as an architect is when you're cut off from part of the process, where there's a point when they say, okay, we've got the design, we don't need you anymore. That's something we try to never agree to. We want to be involved all the way through the process until the students are in and lectures are being held. Then we can walk away and let you guys enjoy the space.
Hi, I'm curious about like the relationship between decision making between like developers and the architect, and what those conversations look like. In like a regular RFP, like how much is already given to you, given to an architectural firm? Like for example, like would you see them insist on like passive house certification, or would they, talk about the type of construction materials they use? How specific do they typically get, and how much wiggle room do you have in the proposals you give?
I think we see the entire spectrum. Some clients come to us with a vision, and one of our most fulfilling relationships we've had is with the New Balance company and Jim Davis. We've done several buildings for him at Boston Landing, and he came to us with a vision for wanting to create. He had a shoe company. Actually, he calls it a technology company that sells shoes. But he had a shoe company, and he wanted to make a place where all aspects of health and fitness could be on display, and that New Balance would be a part of that. But it would be this precinct of the city that would be all about health and wellness and sport and competition. And he didn't really know how that would come to be. And he, of course, had ideas, and he was very prescriptive in certain aspects of it. But we were able to partner with him and create a collaboration that has given what we call Boston Landing today. And if you're familiar with it, maybe you know how good it is, and if you're not familiar with it, you owe yourself a visit. It's not that far away, but it is a really dynamic piece of the city. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, but you also alluded to the other end of the spectrum. A lot of these serial builders, Boston College, other institutions, they know exactly they know exactly how they define success. They know what sustainability metrics you need to hit. They know whether you need to tie into the university central plant or not. They know what the approved materials are that you can use in a building on Boston College. And so you get an RFP from an institution like that, and it's a pretty thick document full of design guidelines that you have to comply with. And so I would say it spans the gamut. From highly prescriptive things where you are bringing your creativity to an existing set of guidelines or rules, to wide open, let's do something nobody's done before.
Hi, sir. In the world of architecture, how would you describe the changing in terms of balance between aesthetics and like the purpose and also the realistic part of a building? Because prior to coming here, I have studied in a short time in a sixth college in the city of Oxford, and I've seen those like ancient buildings that values aesthetics a lot more than what is deemed necessary today. And I've also seen the Boston City Hall in Government Center, which, forgive my frankliness, is the ugliest building I've ever seen in my life. But it serves a good purpose for the government, and also it's quite cheap to build. Like, how would you describe this kind of a balance, and how have it changed from days to days and years to years?
I appreciate that question a lot. It's a hard question to answer. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There are 5 people in Boston who think that the Boston City Hall is a beautiful building. And maybe more, not many more, but I would say the vast majority share your opinion that the Boston City Hall is not a beautiful building. And I hate to add insult to injury, but neither was it inexpensive. It was very expensive. You know, I think that I won't try to dissect what went wrong or right with the Boston City Hall. But you asked a very interesting question, and I think the part of it I really want to answer is, you said you spent time at Oxford. I have not been to Oxford, but that is one of the world's earliest colleges, and those beautiful buildings are built using, by modern standards, primitive building technology. So as an architect today in the 21st century, building into that context, how much do I want to, I said, you know, building here at Boston College, I would do a different building than I did at USM. What would be an appropriate response? And I think, fortunately for you and for me, there's a little building there called the Rothmere Commons, which was built in the early 2000s by a New York architect called KPF. And it is an unabashedly modern building. It's a lot of glass, it's steel, it's concrete, and it's sited right in amongst all of those beautiful collegiate Gothic stone buildings. And anybody who walked in there would say, this is sweet. This building belongs with these other buildings. They were built centuries apart using radically different technologies, but their scale, their size, the way you as a human being feel inside of them, the intimacy of that little brand new building is exactly like the intimate good feelings you get when you walk through those cloisters of the rest of Oxford. So that's well done. That's when the architect has done his homework, when he can use modern materials and technologies and achieve that same kind of specialness that those quadrangles have. That's what we're after.
Was that the building you've described in St. Catherine's College, University of Oxford?
I don't know whether, I'm not familiar with it enough to know whether it's at St. Catherine's College or not, but check it out. If you connect with me, I'll send you photos of it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today, and thank you for those questions. That was awesome. Now I need to drive to Harvard and look at that bridge. But thank you so much.
If you drive along Soldiers Field Road, it will just whap you in the face.
I think it's going to from now on. Cool. Thank you.